Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
When you look at these pictures, you get a sense of what Black life was like.
Some of them look pretty prosperous.
Divine providence was clearly operating in the lives of Black Americans.
Throughout history, Black folks were honorable. They had integrity. That's what Black people were.
We were never taught that America was bad and that we were not Americans. We were raised to love America.
Protesters topple a statue of Christopher Columbus, and hundreds of statues have been vandalized.
You see people trying to rewrite history.
The American people know these names have to go.
Why is that?
Whenever you have something to be proud of, people have less of a chance of controlling you.
This country is racist from top to bottom, from right to left. And for Black people to become a part of that is for them to become, in fact, anti-Black and to hate themselves.
There is no country in this world that a Black person would rather be. Unless, of course, they grow up in this country.
You broke the contract with for 400 years. We played your game.
Then they're fed a lie that is so deceptive.
Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
The reason that lie exists is power.
There are certain people who are using the Negro in order to establish that power in Washington. And the Negro is just merely a pawn in a game that's bigger than he is.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 455. Releasing August 26 on digital and DVD is Uncle Tom 2, An American Odyssey, a follow-up to the 2020 documentary Uncle Tom that further explores the history of Black conservatism in America while also exposing the destructive influence of Marxism within the country's institutions. An eye-opening and unflinching exploration into the key figures and moments in history that has led modern-day America to a spiritual and political crossroads. Uncle Tom 2 is an important film as you'll watch this year. And joining me now to talk about the film Uncle Tom 2 is the film's director, Justin Malone. Justin, I thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, it's really interesting because it's been 2 years since the first Uncle Tom documentary came out. It's kind of wild to me because it only feels like yesterday. I'm sure for yourself, Justin, it might feel like that as well. And I actually had the chance to interview the film's producer, Larry Yoder, when that film came out, which was, for me, like one of the great highlights of my career thus far. And that was a movie that I think for a lot of people, and I mean, in particular, from what I've read in different comments and reviews, was something kind of like of a red pill moment for a lot of kind of like African Americans who didn't know some of the context and some of the history in regards to conservatives within the Black community. What has been the experience for you since that documentary has come out? Because it is a documentary that I think took some people by surprise, and also I think has influenced a lot of people to dive further into the history on Black conservatism in America.
Well, for me, professionally, it opened a lot of doors. We didn't expect the reaction that it received, and so the good part about all that is that it allowed me to keep making films. And so, I mean, as a filmmaker, that's, the dream is to be able to keep making films. But, just as far as, the journey for me, spiritually, and it has been incredible. I never thought that I would go this deep into this subject matter. And I've learned so much about myself, so much about our country. I've met so many amazing people on the way. So it's really been life-changing. And I don't say that lightly. It really has changed my life in pretty much every aspect. So it's been incredible, and I'm really enjoying it. I don't know how I ended up on this journey. I was curious about it, and now I've gotten so deep into the subject matter. So I'm just doing what's in front of me, and I'm enjoying it. I really am.
So when the first film came out, talking about middle of 2020, Uncle Tom 2 comes after some really crazy, monumental times within the history of not only modern America but the Western world. Hell, even the globe at large. I mean, outside of the whole COVID pandemic, we've had the 2022 election, we've had the riots and so many things leading up to that. Now comes this documentary, and I think what's kind of like just important to me when watching the film is that the movie really does go down avenues and really kind of challenges narratives that I think have been really embedded within not only academia, not only in pop culture, but just like in just the zeitgeist, just in mainstream Western world. I mean, how important was it for yourself as a filmmaker, and also along with your producers, to really kind of dive deep into the seeds of of a lot of the destructive influence that I believe we're seeing right now? Because I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in Uncle Tom 2, in regards to the infiltration of kind of like Marxism through a lot of the institutions in America, has really led up to a lot of the kind of like the destruction, and also the kind of like the erosion of kind of like the spiritual life of America that we're seeing right now in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, as I was getting towards the end of completing 2, it became an American Odyssey. I mean, that was the subtitle that I chose for the film, because this started on a Black conservative kind of curiosity, but going into 2, initially I thought we were going to expand on 1, because there was so much material that I had left over that was great. But as we really got going on it, I really started learning things that I had no idea about. And so I would say about a year in to part 2, I kind of decided to, go backwards and wanted to make the film to explain the foundation of these worldviews, because what I was realizing is how many people don't know what Marxism is, how many people don't know American history or world history. When you start learning about some of these atrocities, like for instance, like we never learned about Mao in high school, which is crazy. I mean, he's a major historical figure, and Stalin and Lenin and Marx. You don't really learn about these. I mean, we learn about Adolf Hitler almost every year, it seems, but you have these other, historical figures that you don't really learn about. And so, I had a lot of red meat material, but I decided, because I was pretty sure that there was going to be another installment, because the material and the amount of content that we have, there was no way I was going to get it all in a second film. So I decided, like, let's go back and let's just explain these worldviews to people, and let's show American history for what it really is and for what it really was. And when it came to Black American history, through our research, we just, uncovered a treasure trove of amazing footage that's just buried in archives of an American that I've never seen. When it came to Black America, when we were taught about Black America in school, it was slavery. Mm-hmm. It was Jim Crow. It was oppression. It was protest. So, growing up in the 90s and like being in that generation, you just assume that, Black people have never been able to lift themselves up. But then, when you find lots and lots of photographs, and we found thousands of photographs and hundreds of hours of home movies and films that showed an America that we'd never seen. And that's when it really started, sinking in for me of how deceptive some of these ideologies are. And, our lives are such a short amount of time that it's, it only takes a generation or two to rewrite history. And I actually went back and read 1984 during the production of Uncle Tom 2. And it was so amazing what Orwell was writing about. And what the main character, Winston, his whole job was to rewrite history in real time, right?
Yeah.
And so what started as a curiosity of why Black conservatives were treated negatively in America has turned into, flipping my entire reality upside down.
What's really interesting when I'm watching the documentary and just in listening to what you're talking about is that when I myself have somewhat of a context in regards to communism, in that my parents migrated to Australia from Croatia, or what was the former Yugoslavia. So they've always told me stories about, their experiences with living under communist rule. So I think there are sections within the community, both here in Australia and I'm sure in America, immigrants that would have come from Eastern European countries, that would have come from Latin American countries, that did have experience with the whole kind of like, Marxism and the communist experience, and would have seen the telltale signs of what that looks like. For other people, though, it would not be as obvious. And I think what's really important about your documentary is that it kind of shows this kind of like this infiltration especially within the Black community. But not only, it's really interesting. A lot of times when people talk about the Black community in Australia, in America, a lot of times their starting point is the civil rights era of the 1960s. But your documentary, I think the soul of your documentary comes down to a couple of key figures in the early 1900s. And the two people I'm talking about is Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. And I think those two figures especially kind of really, even to this day, like over 100 years later, really speaks to the kind of like the struggle that's happening within that community. Would that be fair to say that those two figures especially really kind of personify the different clashing ideologies that is happening within the Black community in America, and it's essentially almost like fighting for the soul of that community at the moment?
Well, I would even say that it's the two different worldviews that affect every human. And I think the reason why we spend so much time with Booker T and with Du Bois in the film is because there's really no clearer example of the two worldviews. Because if you peel it back far enough, you have to make a choice. You're going to follow. You're going to follow God or you're going to follow man. There's an order or it's chaos. You can get convoluted and you get in the weeds with it, but if you just go back, far enough, you're going to have to that's basically your two choices, in my opinion. And those two men personify that so clearly. And I think, so it's not just about what happened to the Black community. I think, what Uncle Tom does is it zooms in on the Black community in America to illustrate. Now you could make the same film about feminism or LGBTQ, or you could even go to some of the Eastern European countries that your family's from, and you can make the film about the poor versus the rich. But it all comes down to what is your worldview, and what has happened in America. And keep in mind, I didn't know who Booker T. Washington was until I had already started Uncle Tom 1. I'd heard the name. I'd seen, the name on some schools here and there. So it's like the name was familiar, but I had no idea what an amazing human being Booker T. Washington was. And I was Colonel Allen West, after I interviewed him the first time for part 1, he gave me a signed copy of Up From Slavery. And I read it twice. I read it back to back. And I can say that book, is one of, it changed me. Right. And then I'm like, why do they not teach us about Booker T. Washington? Because in my opinion, he's one of the top 5 Americans ever. I mean, his story is just incredible. Born a slave, just through determination, taught himself how to read and built a university from the ground up and really changed the whole direction of an entire race of people. And he has all but been erased. And so I think if people will come to Uncle Tom 2 with an open mind, they're going to see proof that this worldview was bearing fruit, and there was results coming out of it. And in my opinion, that's why this footage is buried in archives. Because if, like Chad Jackson says in the film, it's like whenever you have something to be proud of, people have less of they can't control you as easily. In order to control someone, you have to, make them afraid and feel despair, And so I think if people, know Booker T. Washington's story, it's very empowering. And so, I think that those two men really are the choices. And I think that you get, and I think what Uncle Tom 2 shows you is the results of both of their worldview very clearly.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. I think something else that really comes up really prominently in the movie is this battle between God and government. And it's really interesting in that, something I've always commented to myself when it came to these past couple of years and this new form of activism through Black Lives Matter, to make a very obvious example, is there is a distinct lack of a spirituality, of a Christianity that was very prominent within previous incarnations of political activism within the Black community. And I think there's a quote in Uncle Tom 2 where it seems like the Black community have lost their anchor, which is very much the church, which is very much the teachings of Jesus Christ. And Black Lives Matter is very much, and a lot of people, I believe, know this now, very heavily influenced by socialist teaching. The people behind it are Marxists, and they use Marxist strategies to kind of like grab power, which they have done rather successfully through a lot of institutions. How important do you think it is that the eradication of God, the eradication of the church, especially the eradication of the family within the Black community, has kind of led to what we're seeing right now. Because I think that above everything else, that right there is the prominent and most important aspect of what we're seeing right now in regards to this kind of like this precipice for the fight of the soul of a nation.
Well, I mean, you have to remove God because, God gives people, hope. He gives people purpose. He gives the world order. And so, I mean, Marx, his first, goal was to dethrone God. And in his own writings, he admits this. And, the deception of this ideology is so pervasive. Marx knew scripture. If you read Marx, like he's very familiar with the Gospels. He's very familiar with scripture, as well as Saul Alinsky, as well as Antonio Gramsci. Like these were very educated, intelligent men, and they understood the power of the Gospels. They understood the power of scripture. And so they use, those writings and that message, and they twist it, and in a way that is really where America was taken. Because, if you go back to the 40s and the 50s, you'll see that there was a lot of anti-communist, pro-America propaganda that was being produced. And if you watch these films, and if you even watch news reels from that time, America was very aware of communism. They knew what it was, and they understood the threat that it was. But over time, generation by generation, that gets, we get dumbed down, and we're not aware of what it is, to the point now where, kids don't even really know who, like we, at the beginning of this conversation, you don't even know who these people are. But America, was built on Christian principles. I mean, the Constitution, it was written on, biblical principles. And in order for, this ideology to take hold in a society like ours, they had to get into the church. And, that is why, when we look at the 1960s and you look at the civil rights movement, a lot of it was based in the church, and they knew that they had to get in there because that's where people were. And that's where you start changing the gospel to a social gospel. And once you start learning this ideology, you start getting familiar with the language, you can start to hear it. And now it's not just in the Black community, it's everywhere. Yeah. I mean, the American church is completely divided right now. And that's by design. That is by design. I think I went off on a tangent there. But yes, fine. I mean, as far when America was overwhelmingly Christian, that is what built this country. I mean, that's what makes America unique, is that, it was that God, given rights, God given purpose. It was those Western Christian ideas that built this country. And, that's why we invented the automobiles and airplanes and refrigerators and cinema. I mean, you just name it. A lot of things came out of America, because in my opinion, that was that little moment in history where people were living a Christian lifestyle for the most part. And now we're seeing 100 years, 120 years of this cancer that's been thrust upon us. And now we're seeing the fruit of that.
And it seems to me that in a lot of ways, and I've said this quite a bit sometimes in my interviews, is that it seems to me that pop culture, in a certain way, has become kind of like the new religion. And I think you can really see that in the way that a lot of times and I think it happens quite a bit in the Black community in America, especially, is how a lot of pop culture kind of like people are kind of like deified. They're kind of like made to look like, take the place of, the prophets and the saints. I mean, it's interesting how in the film we're showing kind of like different murals and in different imagery of people like, say, a George Floyd or other people as well, and almost made to look like the pictures of saints in kind of like glass stained buildings, and it kind of reminds me in a certain way. I don't know if you remember this. I think you and I are around the same age. During the 90s, when Tupac Shakur got killed, he was kind of deified in the same way, to the point where people with the whole kind of Machiavelli kind of stuff is kind of like this kind of like almost urban myth that he might rise from the dead and be resurrected just like Jesus Christ. I think like this kind of stuff is really going to be embedded all the way back then.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean that and that's just, the more, I mean, and that goes with every historical figure, and that's why, the idea of civil rights leaders, right? Like Black leaders. I mean, there's really not any other group of people in America that are so reliant upon leaders, right? I mean, everyone's a leader. And then a lot of the leaders are reverends, right? Reverend Martin Luther King, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton. You can look those men up and you won't find videos or recordings of them preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And but the thing is as humans, we have to read the Bible ourselves. We have to study these things ourselves, because I think, humans tend to get lazy, and, once you remove God from someone, and once someone doesn't understand scripture, they still have that vacancy in their heart, and they still have that desire to be led, and that's going to be filled. And I mean, depending on how religious you are, or how spiritual you want to get, I mean, that's basically what happens time and time again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the human story, right? It's like, God, humans, they fall on their knees, they call for God, they follow God. Things go good. When things go good, they don't need God anymore. And that's the cycle, and, I think we're just, and again, like our lives are so short, but I think we're seeing that cycle happen in America right now, in the world at large. I mean, you're in Australia, right?
Yes.
I mean, your country is going through some stuff too,
Oh yeah, I mean, we've recently had an election, and our newly appointed Prime Minister has chosen not to swear upon the Bible upon being sworn into office. And it's not the first time we've had an atheist Prime Minister, but I think what's really happening within our country that's similar to what's happening in America is that our political leaders are kind of like seen as kind of like these kind of like surrogates for what would be previously been our priests and our preachers and people within our community that had a strong kind of spiritual backbone and context. I think a lot of people are replacing that with politicians and celebrity figures, and so exactly the same things happening here.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it, I mean, it's like it's very similar. Like you have your disciples and your apostles who write the Gospels and write Scripture. Well, if you go to the other side, I mean, Marx and the Manifesto and Engels, and then you even get into modern day with Alinsky and Rules for Radicals. I mean, that is Scripture to a lot of people. I mean, that is their Bible, right? That's what they look to for their answers. So it's a stolen. One of the lines of the film is, what communism and humanism and Marxism, it's a stolen version of Christianity, but it removes God, but it promises people, to fulfill that desire in the heart to see all things made right. And that's the deception. That's why it's, so hard to fight, because, you're fighting something that's very deceptive. And it's an idea that is very good on paper, and that's why you can sell it in 10 minutes, and, it can take, 2 years and 4,000 hours of editing to make a film to explain what is going on.
Well, for everyone out there listening, August 26th, Uncle Tom 2 and American Odyssey releases, both streaming and also DVD. You can go to uncletom.com. That's the official website, and there we'll have links to where you can pre-order the film, where you can catch screenings as well, and a lot of other cool things. And also, Justin, you got the first Uncle Tom film available for free for people to watch, which I think is excellent. It's a really cool way for people to really introduce themselves to kind of like the movie and a lot of the key figures within the Black conservative movement. But I think that what we've done here with the second movie, not only is it important for a lot of the Black community in America, but I think it's important for everyone to watch it, because a lot of these themes, as we've talked about, are very much universal. And I think a lot of the things here have been incredibly illuminating to me, watching it and learning about these unspoken parts of history and challenging very conventional narratives that you do in your documentary. I think is an incredibly important thing. And I think your documentary has to be a must watch for everyone to watch it, I think, because I do believe that the soul, not only of a nation in America, is being fought right now, but I think the soul of the Western world is as well. So this documentary is an incredibly important tool for a lot of people to find a lot of resources and information that they might not have known beforehand. And it's incredibly well-made film as well. The archive footage, the photography, I love the music in it as well. It's a fantastic documentary. I love the first Uncle Tom movie. The second one I absolutely love as well. And Justin Malone, I thank you so very much for your time today. And congratulations with the film. I wish you the best of luck with its release.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me, and look forward to speaking with you soon, sir.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.